Hello everyone. My name's Alex Code. I'm the museum manager here at PoCo Heritage Museum and Archives. Hopefully you can see me. I'm the one in the gray jacket over here. And tonight I'm excited to introduce you all to Julia Espinosa. Julia is a PhD candidate at U of T, University of Toronto, Department of Psychology, where she studies the ways that our dogs think and understand the world around them. Julia is also the co-founder of ManyDogs, a multinational consortium for collaborative studies in canine research, and is doing great work in science communication, as you can tell from her being here. But also you should go check out her TEDx talk called The Secret Life of Dogs. There's a couple of people joining. One thing before we start, however, I would like to say that we at PoCo Heritage acknowledge that we're hosting this talk on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Coquitlam First Nation. We thank the Coquitlam who continue to live on these lands and care for them along with the waters. Of course, this month is Indigenous History Month. If you follow us on social media, you might have already seen us talking about this, but dogs in particular have a pretty unique history here in Port Coquitlam, as well as across Coast Salish territory. I won't go into it here, but I'm going to put some links in the chat at the end of the talk once we're done, where you can learn a bit more about this unique history, as well as some other resources to learn about First Nations languages, arts, and culture in British Columbia. I'm going to let a couple more people in. And Julia, I don't want to take up any more of your time. The one thing is that we're going to take questions at the end. So if you think of anything, just write it down or maybe put it into the chat and we'll circle around to it later. All right, Julia, if everything's good on your end, I think you can take it away.
Thank you so much. I am really honored to be here with all of you, and I'm very humbled that so many of you showed up to hear about dog cognition. It's my most favorite topic to talk about, which is, so I'm really happy to have an opportunity to share it with all of you. I'm going to start sharing my screen so that we can get, here we go. Okay. Let me enter presenter view. And if Alex, you want to give me a thumbs up if you can see the main slide okay, not the presenter notes?
Yep, looks good.
Okay, great. Last thing you want to do is give away what you're going to say to everybody. All right, here we go. All right, so I've entitled my talk Thinking Dogs, and as most of you are dog owners and know, there's a lot more that they do besides just thinking, but that's my area of expertise, and I'm really happy to have a chance to share it with you. Winnie, my dog, is featured here. We were finally able to get out of the lockdown that's been in Toronto since November. And we were able to go up to our cottage, and she sat still for a very quick moment. I was able to take this cute photo of her in the forget-me-nots. All right. So a little bit more about me and why I chose this path. Well, chose, and it just sort of kind of happened a little bit, but I've been obsessed with dogs from a very young age, and because my parents would not let me have a dog, I decided to start my own neighborhood dog walking business when I was 12, because I was just desperate to be around some dogs. What shocks me the most is anyone let me take their dog for a walk, and yeah, that was quite fun. After that, I started being interested in healthcare and animal welfare in a veterinary setting, and volunteered and worked in veterinary hospitals throughout high school and university. And then when I moved to Canada in 2013, I started dog walking and dog training. And eventually I decided that grad school was the right fit for me. And I began a master's degree at the University of Guelph in animal behavior and welfare, where I worked with Dr. Lee Neal to investigate early nursing behavior in puppies. And as another line of research, we were very interested in understanding how people recognize recognize very subtle signs of fear or stress or anxiety in their dogs in order to design interventions to help them notice and assuage those signs of anxiety. Then in 2016, I heard about a new lab that was opening up at the University of Toronto. And so I moved there to start my PhD. And since then, I've been focusing on understanding how dogs think. And typically, people will use the label canine cognition or dog cognition. But really, what that label means is just what's going on inside their head. And that could be anything from feeling emotions or thinking through a problem, trying to solve something, or it could be something based in perception and how their visual or olfactory system will sense the world around them and relay that information through their brain and process it. So psychology and cognition can cover a very, very broad range of topics, as you'll see later on in the talk. And so at this point, as Alex said, I am a PhD candidate, and the plan is that I should be wrapping up my dissertation at the end of this calendar year. And then it's next steps are TBD. So hoping for good things. Okay. Oh, what happened now? Well, that's not ever what you want to happen. Here, let me go back to the part in the slide I'm supposed to be at. Just a second. Yes, I have been Zooming for a year now, and I still make mistakes. Okay.
We all do.
Thank you.
Don't worry about it.
I think that's what happens when you hit one arrow instead of like instead of the down arrow, I hit the right arrow. So that took me all the way to the end. Anyway, let's hop back in. Okay. Thank you all for being understanding. Okay. So let's get on to the dog stuff now. I guess the big question at the beginning is, why would we study dogs? They're adorable and they're fun and they're basically furry family members for many of us. But what are we going to learn from studying them, and why is it important to know what's going on inside their brains? I might not have an answer that's going to satisfy everyone, but I hope that some of the things I'm going to share today will give you a good idea about why I'm particularly motivated. Maybe some of it will resonate with you too. First, there's something super unique about dogs that makes them especially valuable in research. Researchers often look to our nearest primate relatives, other apes, and even monkeys, because we have a shared evolutionary history that might mean we are going to be sharing thinking and reasoning abilities, and that's often the first step in where they go to find answers to evolutionary questions. And dogs are much more distantly related to us, but as we'll see, through both domestication and their close daily interactions with people in modern days, they may be a better example of how to understand reasoning and cognition because they're able to relate to and even communicate with us socially in a way that other primates do not. Also, they coexist in our environment, experiencing many of the same events and needing to solve many of the same challenges that we do. So in some ways that makes them a better social partner, unlike other animals. There we go. I've got the slide advancement down. Okay, precisely because dogs are such wonderful companions and they share such a big part of our lives, it's very easy to forget that they don't experience the world in the way that we do, and that they've got a very different set of senses and perceptual abilities from humans. So imagine, like in one of these two photos, you and your dog are taking a walk through the woods or sitting on a serene hilltop at sunset. As a human, you might be thinking about how things are looking, how the light might be changing, or what sort of trees you're passing by. Your dog, on the other hand, might be focusing on something entirely different that is more salient to them. Maybe it's the smells coming out of the damp earth, or maybe there are small bugs running across the path, things that are really smelly or have movement might catch their senses much more than other visual things like light and color. So while you're sharing an experience together, you're actually getting very different types of information about it. We don't often stop and think about how other animals are gathering information about the world, or at least I don't stop as often as I think I should. But they have all sorts of secret sensory superpowers that humans aren't able to experience firsthand. So imagine what it would be like to fly or use echolocation to navigate and find food, or maybe even use smell to represent the world. And those abilities give animals access to a totally different set of information that's outside of our reach. And that's a big reason why I think it's so important to investigate how animals are thinking and feeling. I believe that by giving that topic much closer attention and understanding the animals that we're sharing the world with, we can have a better appreciation for them, and we can help to realize the limits of our own knowledge. And that can be a very important thing to keep in mind in today's climate. So when it comes to thinking about animals and their mental abilities, humans often conceptualize them at either end of a spectrum. On the one hand, we have a behaviorist approach and thinking of dogs as these black boxes that are just responding to whatever external cues happen to come along, that aren't thinking or feeling or even learning about the environment. And this was the prevailing theory about animals through the mid-20th century, before we had what was known as the cognitive revolution in psychological and behavioral sciences. And then we got over on the other end of the spectrum, we have anthropomorphic approach, which is seeing our dogs as these adorable fur babies and treating them just like small humans that we can dress up and onto whom we are projecting our own thoughts and our own emotions. Anthropomorphism is a really big word. I trip over it a lot. Maybe I shouldn't have put it in my talk quite so many times. But it simply means that humans are endowing a non-human with specific motivations and feelings. And there's no way to know whether or not they have them. So both of these, while they give us a framework, are probably not correct. And in some cases, very extreme ones, they could even be harmful to dogs' well-being because it's basically an all or nothing approach. So contrary to the behaviorist perspective, dogs do have a rich internal life, and there is a strong body of evidence that's constantly growing and being added to by behavior professionals and scientists that show us more and more the things that they're capable of learning and responding to. So then what about the anthropomorphic side? If we can't do behaviorism, what about our other option? So contrary to behaviorism, the anthropomorphic one is over-endowed with all of these emotional and motivational characteristics that are very human. But dogs' internal life doesn't necessarily resemble that of a human. Dogs might think and feel things in response to what's happening around them, but it's not going to help them out for us to assume that they have exactly the same thoughts and feelings. We have to keep in mind that a lot of how we think and act is the result of growing up in a particular culture that has social norms for how to behave. Thus, we have to conclude that a behaviorist an anthropomorphic dichotomy does not represent dogs very well at all. So let's think about some other ways in which we can conceptualize our pets' minds. I guess what would be some alternatives, but taking a step back, let's think about another question instead. And that question is super simple. I've thought it a lot about my dog, Winnie, and that's, do our dogs love us? Maybe you're thinking that they just love food or the attention that they give you or you give to them. And honestly, with Winnie, sometimes it seems like she's just hanging out with me because I only buy her the very, very good liver treats. But what this question is actually getting at is not necessarily just love, but it's asking us, do dogs experience complex emotions? And I know emotion is kind of one of these big words and it comes with a lot of caveats. So let's take a look at some of the scientific evidence that's explicitly addressed this topic of pet emotions and feelings. So What could they possibly be feeling? Is it anything like what we're feeling, and how could it be different? A really familiar example for many of you as pet guardians is an example of how humans are representing dog emotion and the idea of the guilty dog. So there's tons of videos you've probably seen of pets online that are feeling guilty when they've been accused of something that they did that was wrong, such as making a huge mess, going through the trash, maybe chewing up favorite shoes. And when they're acting guilty, dogs avoid eye contact and try to make themselves smaller. Maybe they're turning away. And these behaviors, we are perceiving similarities in how humans might act if they had gotten into something they weren't supposed to. And we think, look at how guilty they're acting. They know that they did something wrong. They know it. However, is that actually true? Guilt's a super complex emotion that's embedded in cultural norms of right and wrong and moral reasoning, and understanding that the consequences of your behavior, as well as the remorse you're going to feel knowing that you did something wrong, that's a big thing to ask of our dogs. So with all of that reasoning and cultural knowledge as a prerequisite for guilt, how can dogs experience it the same way that we do? The answer is they probably don't. And a really cool study by one of my colleagues who's in New York City, Alexandra Horowitz. She's written many wonderful books about dogs that you might have come across. In this study, she created a situation for dogs and they were shown a really, really yummy treat by their owners, and the owners were said, no, leave it. And then the owner turned and walked out of the room. In one condition, so some of the dogs, a research assistant came in and took away the treat. And in another condition, for another set of dogs, the research assistant came in and gave the treat to the dog anyway. Then the owner was called back into the room, and the research assistant told the owner that their dog didn't obey them and had eaten the treat. The owners scolded them, and regardless of whether or not the dogs had eaten the treat or the treat had been taken away from them, they all exhibited behavioral cues that we interpret as signs of guilt. So what does that actually mean? Why would they act guilty if they didn't do anything wrong? Well, one reason could be is that they're reacting to our behavior. They likely don't even connect our anger in the moment with their past actions. It's not impossible, but it's not likely. They hear a loud voice and they see threatening body postures, and they try to appease us with their downcast expression and gaze that we are interpreting as guilt. Just a second, there we go. However, right. And so because of our embedded cultural ideas of what guilty is and how that looks, it's more that we are projecting our idea onto them rather than them actually feeling it. What they are probably feeling is maybe a little bit worried that you're upset with them, but they might not be sure why. And so these highly expressive postures with the turning away and making themselves smaller and maybe even looking up at you, these are things dogs are able to do, and not just by accident. Many dog breeds have evolved to have what are known as paedomorphic or very childlike features, probably because we as humans selectively bred for that, and we find that very cute. So if you think about some of the most popular breeds right now, like French Bulldogs or Cavalier King Charles Spaniels, they have very large, expressive, even almost human-like eyes, and very mobile eyebrows as well. The eyebrow movement is particularly important, and that happens when there's a particular muscle that's up in their foreheads called the AU101 muscle, and what it does is raise and lower the inner brow to create this very, very, very deadly puppy eye. It's so hard to resist when your dog looks at you and turns their head and cocks their eyebrow. You can't resist it. I can't resist it. I should never have a dog. I will spoil them to death. So there was some really interesting research that showed that dogs that have more active AU101 muscles that enhance their very human-like eyes and features have an advantage over less expressive dogs. And historically, this might have factored into domestication and which dogs might have been selected by humans or might have selected humans to make them more relatable. But it's also true in a modern day scenario. This keeps giving dogs some help. A study that was done in the UK looked at adoption rates coming out of shelters, and they found that there was a correlation between facial expressiveness in dogs and adoption rates from shelters, meaning that humans or us, we were more likely to want to adopt a dog that had a very expressive face. And that includes having a well-developed AU101 muscle that can move their brows up and down like this adorable dog here. And so what we're interpreting when we see this is maybe some outward sign of an emotion that they're having, whether that's guilt or maybe it's an appeal. They're like, why won't you take me for the walk? I would love to go for the walk. But what actually is happening there is it might just be an evolved strategy, and one that took advantage of our weakness for cute, adorable dog faces, and it's played actually quite a big role in dog evolution. And so I want to take a moment here to just pause and emphasize that even though it's hard to know what's going on inside our dogs and understand what the thoughts might be exactly or what the feeling might be in the moment, whether it's guilt or love or some other complex feeling, it's not because I'm not saying that they are incapable of such feelings. I personally, and as a little bit of a scientist as well, I do think that dogs are capable of feeling things like love, especially for people that they bond with. The problem is that we are not able to ask them, and we're limited by the investigation techniques that we have at our disposal that are able to actually access those things. And obviously invasive surgeries and studies like that are not something that we would ever want to do to our beloved dogs. And so yes, that's what I wanted to emphasize there. It's not that they can't have emotions, but it's really hard to understand exactly what that might be like. So basically what we're stuck with is coming up with our very best study designs that can let dogs show us through behavior, through attention, through various measures like that, how they're processing information and how they might be feeling about a given situation. So that brings me to a new study that maybe some of you might have heard about. It was very recently published this spring by some researchers in New Zealand. They came up with a really ingenious solution to this measurement problem and how to get at what dogs might be experiencing real time in a really, really brilliant way. And it's so simple as well. I hope you're going to be as excited about it as I am. Okay, so what did they do? Well, they thought perhaps there's a lot of talk going on around jealousy and guilt, and sorry, I was supposed to reverse those, guilt and jealousy. Not many people have been able to take a look under the hood at jealousy and what's going on with our dogs. But it's still one of those common stereotypes that will come up, the jealous dog who needs all of your time and attention. Going along with those maybe less than flattering reputations some dogs might earn is obviously dogs are incredibly loyal, and so their attachment to us goes very deep and it's very strong. But going along with loyalty and love, maybe there's other adaptive things, and I'm going to talk about how jealousy can be adaptive, that could be building into that relationship as well. So jealousy may not be viewed very positively when we think about our relationships to others and other humans or our dogs, but there might actually be a cool evolutionary advantage that's hidden underneath that could have played an important role for human society. So we typically think of jealousy as some sort of unpleasant reaction and we shouldn't feel jealous. And maybe someone is jealous of the time or attention spent on others, but what if jealousy is actually an adaptive response that motivates us to protect a social relationship that we've invested heavily into? So our friends or our family, we would want to protect something like that. Maybe that's true of our dogs as well. So the cool measurement study that I wanted to tell you about now. With this in mind, dogs in the study were hooked up by their leash attached to their harness to a force gauge. And that force gauge could measure how strongly they pulled on the leash. And so what happened was they watched their owner their owner wearing dark glasses so they couldn't see the eyes, pet and praise a stuffed dog like the ones in this picture here. And so the dogs watched their person interacting with this potential social rival. The researchers noticed that they pulled much, much harder in an effort to get to their owner than in a scenario where they watch their person do the same actions, petting and praising a non-dog-like object. And so interestingly, this same sort of behavior of wanting to run to your person has been observed in young children. When they see their mother interacting with another child, many children will rush over and try to claim their mother, maybe staking their claim or defending what they see as their most important relationship from someone that they see as an interloper. And so what this similarity suggests is that dogs may be susceptible to jealousy-like feelings when they think that their person might be paying attention to another dog, or that they are at the very least interested in approaching their person to see what's going on with this other social rival. What's really interesting is that instead of doing a complex attention or measurement, it simply was how strong is the dog pulling to get to their owner. And that to me is such an elegant way of trying to get at the strength of their interest and their motivation. I wish someone had thought of this much sooner. So while we might not know exactly what's going on in dogs' mind when they see their owner petting and praising a stuffed dog, it's studies like this that are using these natural behavior measures and responses from dogs that can give us a really good look into how their emotional lives might be unfolding. So, as I emphasized before, dogs may or may not feel guilt or jealousy the way that humans do, but these are subjective emotional experiences that come with a lot of social baggage. The other thing that I alluded to at the beginning of the talk is that psychology covers a broad range of topics, and it's not just the things that we're thinking and feeling in response to this, the social events that are happening around us, but it's also how we are perceiving and processing things about the physical world. And so dogs, since they have eyes, noses, ears, mouths, and many of the same under circuitry that we have in our brains, maybe they are able to perceive the world in the same way we do. I mean, it's not the craziest idea. But one really good example of where we might want to pump the brakes on this idea that we're seeing and smelling and hearing the same things is that humans have fantastic vision, and we live in a world that's been constructed and built all around this excellent trichromatic visual system, which means that we have 3 types of cone cells in our eyes, and those cone cells allow us to sense a broad range of color or the light in different wavelengths. And so there's a persistent myth that's going around, or it has been around for some time. Maybe nobody here believes that, since you're all very up on dog things, but a lot of people will try and tell you that dogs see in grayscale. And that that is absolutely a myth and not true. They can totally see in color, but they're just not seeing color the same way you do, because instead of 3 cone cells, they have 2 cone cells, which means that they are sensing only a subset of the light wavelengths that humans are. Going along with that, even though humans might see more colors than dogs, there are even animals beyond other than dogs and humans that can see even more interesting things, such as butterflies, bees, or mantis shrimp. They can see ultraviolet light, they can see infrared light, and probably other colors that we can't even imagine. So we're able to see a good chunk of what's out there, but other animals are going to see something even more interesting. So the reason I bring up color and the difference in how we're perceiving objects based on color is because an experiment that I ran here at U of T in the first year that I started, and thinking back to what it was like being a first year undergraduate student, there's so many things that I wish I had done differently with this. And they're like, what was I thinking? But whatever. Keep moving on and improving as we go. So the experiment was a little bit of an accident because I had planned to design a series of choice tasks for dogs that would look at whether or not they were able to make statistical inferences and basically reason about probabilities. And so, but I didn't even get to that point because the very first step in the study was to make sure that things I was giving dogs to reason about had were distinct to the dogs and they could choose easily between them. So what I did was I picked two things of differing value. That was hot dog slices and dried corn kernels. And so you might be thinking, it's obvious dogs love hot dogs. What would they do with corn kernels? And that's where my line of reasoning had gone too. And I thought there's no way they won't be able to see these things and not pick the hot dog. That's just impossible. And so, however, when I showed dogs these two jars, they only chose the hot dogs 59% of the time. That is a very low rate and basically only marginally better than a coin flip. After I had tested 49 dogs with this, they were significantly better than chance, but when it's 59%, maybe significantly better than chance doesn't actually mean that much here. So I was completely stumped and I had no idea why they wouldn't be able to differentiate between these two items. They would actually physically reject corn kernels by spitting them out after they got them, but they were more than happy to eat hot dogs and go back for more. And so in talking about this conundrum I was having with my friend Sarah Biozier, who, if you're interested in online dog studies, runs a lab in New York City at Hunter College. It's called the Thinking Dog Center, and very cool stuff. Anyway, she's an expert in dog vision, and she suggested that potentially dogs are not able to visually distinguish these two items and that they're just not distinct. And so that pulled me down a whole other rabbit hole of trying to figure out what dogs are seeing when they look at the world around them. One of the first diagnostic tools I used, and I think this is an approximation, so we should take it with a grain of salt, but there is an app online that will tell you what your dog is seeing. You can feed it any image and it will pop out what your dog sees. And so this is the result I got. And you can see the bottom photo is much less distinct than the top photo. And so it's probably, if this is in any way true, then no wonder they couldn't know which one the hot dog was. But that wasn't the end of this study. Recently this year, well, not this year, last year, everything at our lab had to shut down because of the pandemic. But from all of these preference tests between corn and hot dogs, we generated an enormous pile of video data. And so what we did was code all of this data to see how the dogs were looking. If they could not distinguish one item from the other, we would expect them to spend equal time looking at the two items, assessing their options, and then randomly picking. And so we should see no difference in how long they spent looking at something versus the thing that, or there would be no correlation between looking at something and picking something. And the reason we went in this direction is because humans actually have some really cool visual attention signatures. We show this from an incredibly young age. We look longer at faces that are familiar or ones that are important to survival. So infants will gaze much longer at their mother's face over other adult human faces. And when we are making choices, and this comes from a long or a big pile of marketing research and using eye trackers with humans to understand how we are assessing our surroundings in, say, a supermarket. They want to know what things you're looking at. And what they found is that humans tend to look longer at things that they like more. And when they look longer at something, they're also more likely to pick it up and interact with that object. And so that made me think, well, Do dogs also show any of these visual signals or signatures? Are they able to differentiate things such as a preference or show me that they have a preference by looking longer at it than the thing that they don't like? And so after a ton of hours of coding to get all of this visual data from videos, we found that the amount of times that dogs spent looking at each of the two items, they were more likely to pick the hot dog when they looked at it longer. And so since this is proportional looking time between the hot dog and the corn, as the blue bar and the orange bar are going up, that means the more time they spent looking at the corn kernel, they were less likely to pick it. So that told me at least they were able to somewhat tell the difference visually. Why they're still picking it at such a low level, I do not know, but that is more than enough information for me to have here. I will leave it for somebody else to take up in another study. I'm quite done with hot dogs and corn kernels for my career now. Yes, we can do something else. So, oh, quick question. Right. Just because I'm not going to use corn kernels and hot dogs, though, doesn't mean that I'm not going to do things with vision, because, and I wanted to show you this adorable picture of my dog Winnie, who is in fact a working girl when the lab was running, and she helped us out with an eye tracking study that we were running. And so the eye tracking study involved developing a new method, and this method was completely detached from wires and cables and was able to be carried around by the dog on a harness, and we could even take them outside and go on walks with it. But the reason I'm mentioning it here is because tracking eye movements in our dogs is a fantastic way of understanding what things they're paying attention to. And if they're anything like humans, they'll look at things that they like more, they'll look at things that are more important for their survival, or they might spend time alternating gaze between things in a sort of predictive way that could tell us maybe they expect something to happen or they are anticipating some type of outcome. So of course, I will take any opportunity to share my dog photos. I am absolutely typical in that way. But yes, vision is a really important aspect of dog behavior that new technology like this is hopefully going to help us unlock a whole new world of understanding how dogs are viewing the world around them. So, whether or not dogs have really great vision is sort of maybe it's immaterial to what things about their visual attention can tell us, but regardless of that, they more than make up for whatever deficiencies they have there with their scent, which is absolutely incredible. Their noses are incredibly sensitive, and they're able to detect odors in the environment that we are completely unaware of. And that blows my mind. Imagine if you were able to find your way home just by smell, or think about what it would be like to be able to smell someone else's emotion, like stress or anxiety. Those cause changes in hormone levels in your body quite quickly, and as we know, many dogs are able to sense these changes and alert their guardians for medical conditions. But in some ways, it's almost like smelling an emotion. It's crazy. So by looking at dog physiology, we know that they have over 3 million scent receptors, 300 million, not 3 million, that's too few, 300 million scent receptors, which is 50 times more receptors than what a human has. And that means that they're able to detect many, many more scent molecules than we are, and that they can also smell them when they're at a much lower concentration in the air. And so one way that they're able to do that, and you've probably seen your dog doing this on walks, is inhaling very rapidly in quick succession. And they'll breathe in, they can breathe in as quickly as 4 to 7 times per second, which is really, really fast. And so this technique draws scent molecules much more deeply into their noses, and at higher, the concentration will build up and allow them to gain more information as they're sniffing. One thing I've noticed about Winnie is that she tends to do this much more when she is after it's just rained and the ground is very damp. So if your dog does things like that, I would be interested in hearing as well. Yes. Oh, so very cool things about scent. Using their amazing sense, dogs are able to do something that's really, really fascinating for me. They can form a mental representation of an object in their mind based on scent alone. At least that's what the theory is. This obviously, as with all studies discussed here, until we replicate something many times over, it's hard to take something as proof. So right now we're working with evidence of varying strengths. But imagine what that would be like to just simply catch a whiff of maybe your favorite sweater or your favorite toy like a ball, and then be able to just conjure up that image in your mind and represent that. Obviously, we're not entirely sure that that's how dogs are experiencing things in their minds, but a fascinating study by some researchers in Germany at an MPI in Jena looked at how dogs formed expectations of objects based on the scent of the object. And so in the study, dogs were led to a scent trail that had been made by dragging a toy like a ball or a Kong along the ground. And then they were encouraged to follow that scent trail. And when they finished and got to the end of the trail, they found a hiding box. And inside the box was either the object that had made the scent trail or a totally different toy, such as a tug rope. And what they found was that when dogs who had been primed with a ball scent, but instead got the rope, hesitated and continued looking around as though they were trying to find out where the thing was that had created the scent, because they were surprised at finding something totally else than what they had maybe expected. So this just underscores how much information dogs are able to get from the world beyond what they're able to see. And I don't know about you, but this just keeps blowing my mind over and over whenever I think about it. So now that we know a little bit more about dog sensory perception, what are they doing with all of that information, and how are they using it to guide their behavior? As part of my job as a university student here at U of T, I design puzzles that are interactive and fun for dogs to do, and they almost always involve finding treats. So one of the puzzles that I designed for them was to test whether or not dogs were able to reason about the property of solidity, which is something that we as fully developed humans don't give a second thought. When we put something down on the table, we know that it will be there when we go back. We don't have to look underneath. And so we take it completely for granted. But what if dogs don't necessarily reason about object properties like solidity, or how objects are affected by things like gravity in the same way that we do? So in one experiment that I did that was derived from work that had been done in kids and in monkeys and great apes, I showed dogs a bookcase-like apparatus that you can see here, and in the middle, the shelf is removable and could slide right out. So what I wanted to know by using this is if dogs are able to find a treat that was dropped through the top and fell inside, if they couldn't see where it landed. But just by knowing if the shelf was there, it should be on top of the shelf, and if the shelf was not there, it should be at the bottom. And so you might think that this, in order to be able to reason about something like this and search correctly, they would necessarily have to understand that the shelf acts as a barrier and that gravity pulls the object down. So they wouldn't need to look over the top or come to me as the experimenter to know to get their treat. They should know and just sort of have this moment of insight, is what it's often called in the field. So in some cases, we had the shelf in the middle, and that would catch the treat, and the dogs should look on top to get the reward. And in others, the shelf was removed, and that's what that looks like here. Yeah, there we go. Sometimes it was removed, and the treat fell all the way down, and the dog should look at the bottom in order to get it. And here's what that looks like. In running this study, I did a few different conditions. The one that Tria is doing here, it exactly mimics the picture that you saw previously. But after dropping treats inside, many of the dogs that I tested seemed to have this intuitive sense about where they should go look for the treat based on the presence or the absence of the shelf. And it's quite similar to what we see in about 3 and 4-year-old children. Prior to that age, kids are about at chance and where they look for things that are dropped inside of a similar looking apparatus. But dogs were surprisingly very good at it. They have this reputation for not being able to solve physically based problems, and they're very good socially. But in this one, they did quite well, and I'm hoping I'm going to have that paper published very soon. So in the last couple examples, we talked about really concrete ways that dogs are able to think about and represent the world. So maybe we can zoom out a little bit more and think about a different type of cognitive concept that's more abstract. And that's whether or not dogs have a concept of the self. So this is one of those loaded philosophical questions that's been debated for hundreds of years, and I don't know if anyone will ever get a satisfactory answer. But the question is whether or not animals have some consciousness and sense of themselves and others in a way that's similar to how humans do. I don't know if, it's a question, maybe there is no right answer, but it comes down to the strength of your personal beliefs about it. But it is been the fuel for many interesting investigations, such as the one I'm going to tell you about right now. So the way that we test self-recognition in humans, and particularly in infants, is the mirror self-recognition test, where we put a baby in front of a mirror and there's a dot on their forehead. And if they recognize themselves in the mirror, they're going to go up and reach and touch their own forehead to remove the dot. What is that there? But if they don't recognize themselves, they'll reach out to touch the baby in the mirror to remove the dot from the other baby's face, because that's not normally there. And usually what we see is that right around 18 to 22 months of age, they're going to start recognizing that that is indeed a reflection of themselves and start to touch their face. But prior to that, they would reach out and look for the other baby. So far, we have not seen dogs pass this test, but that's also because, I mean, they're very different from babies. They don't have hands, so maybe we're not asking the right sort of question to get at their understanding. So another approach would make sense for a quadruped. So there have been a couple studies, and results are preliminary but promising. And it seems as if dogs are able to use scent in order to represent and recognize themselves in much the same way that we might use sight. And so this was studied by placing several different scent containers in a room, and then dogs were brought in one by one to investigate the different containers. And these containers contained various things like urine from the dog, urine from another dog, cell samples, things that were quite distinct. And anise as well. But dogs spent the least amount of time investigating the container that had their own urine in it, almost as though that didn't have really much to offer to them. It wasn't as interesting as some of the other containers, such as the container from a different dog. One of the ways in which we would be able to interpret this is that by spending different amounts of time sniffing their urine and another dog's urine, it tells us that they are perceiving them definitely as different, but then the one that they spend more time investigating could possibly be because they're getting more information out of it. And whether that's about physical characteristics of the dog, we're not sure, but that difference has been observed, and that they seem to understand that one scent means me and the other scent is not me. So I really hope that people will continue using olfaction as a way to gauge dog behavior and understand what's going on in their minds. It's such a fantastic way that's so intuitive for them. Yes. So we've covered a ton of different topics about emotions, cognition, and looking how dogs share or diverge from the human experience and abilities. And so there are several similarities, but it's also quite clear that dogs and other animals too are living a really different experience. These experiences that they have, they're uniquely adapted to appreciate, and they hold a very special ability in order to gather information in the way that they do. So they've got emotional experiences, I believe, and they've got these stunning sensory perception abilities and also cognitive capabilities that are just uniquely dog. And we know a little bit more than we used to, but there's still so much more that we would hope to be able to gain from researching them. And so it's a really exciting time to be both a dog guardian like all of us, or a researcher also like myself. There's a lot more information at our fingertips now than there used to be. But a lot of this information, we should keep in mind that it needs to be replicated to provide strong evidence that what they found is in fact typical and not some type 1 error. But all this information is going to help us piece by piece put together a picture of how our dogs are thinking and feeling and understanding the world around them. So that's all I have for today. And I hope that that is good, that we are good on time, Alex. But yes, thank you all so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Julia. 1 second. I'm just gonna remove the spotlight. Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, I learned a lot. I think if people have questions, we're going to open it up. One thing to keep in mind, though, is that although Julia knows a lot about dogs, she's not a professional dog trainer. So unfortunately, she can't help us with how to train our dogs. But if you have any other kinds of dog thinking related questions, be happy to hear them. I personally had one, not necessarily about dogs specifically, but the way that our dogs see, the two cone receptors. And you were talking about the pistol shrimp, and how common is it to have 2 cone receptors rather than R3? Like if we look to other common pets, like, I don't know, cats or rabbits and guinea pigs and stuff, do they also, any of them only have 2, or?
I'm not entirely sure. I want to say that, and please, if someone else knows the answer, you should absolutely chime in. I'm not a super up on vision in other animals, but I do believe that there is quite a bit of variability across mammals and other invertebrates about which color lengths they are sensitive to. But that would be a really interesting cross-species comparison to do about which animals are able to see. As you can imagine, with $1 billion pet industry, designing stimuli and toys that are the most appealing to the specific animal would be a very fruitful area of research.
Does anyone else have any burning questions?
I have a burning question.
All right, Brian, what's your question?
I want to know if Julia can predict who's going to win the pet election.
Pet election. Oh, I'm going to have to hear about the candidates.
Well, I can predict.
Well, for those who don't know, we at the museum are running a little pet election fundraiser. So we have, I think, about 32 candidates. I'll flash some of them on the screen for people to see.
Oh my goodness. Did they all upload their CVs as well?
Yes, they all have their own little bio.
Oh my goodness, favorite food.
Yes. Pets are obviously very important. We have a lot of great pet photos in our archive as well. Like very historic photos, like the soldiers leaving for World War I. You can see the pictures just filled with dogs seeing them off at the train station.
It's such a beautiful relationship, especially dogs and humans, that's existed for thousands of years. It just, ancient cave paintings and things like this all the way through. I hope, yeah.
there's some questions in the chat. So Karen is wondering how long you've been studying.
Oh, that's such a good question. I think I started really observing dogs when I was super young, but my formal training as a researcher began mid bachelor's degree when I was at the University of Michigan. And I was, at the time, I had transferred. So also another thing about me is I was homeschooled kindergarten through high school, and that so adjusting to university was a shock. But I met a wonderful researcher at the University of Michigan, and together we started examining dog play behavior. And we were particularly interested in how they shared objects in play. And so that started probably about 12 years ago. And since that time, I have worked in a range of labs across Europe and North America, and a little bit with wolves and a little bit with what you would call maybe non-pet dogs. And yeah, so oh my goodness, it's been a long time.
and she has another one that is why is it sometimes a power struggle with dogs?
Such a good question. Winnie, I characterize her with words like stubborn and willful and contrarian and things like that. And hopefully I'm interpreting this in the way that you were asking. So please get me back on track if I go somewhere you weren't interested in. But what I was thinking is that a lot of dogs have, like, they're not just conduits for things that we want to go on, what we want and what we are planning, right? They don't know what the plan is. So imagine if you went for a walk with your dog and you were like, I'm gonna take them around the block, but the dog's like, but we're actually gonna go this way. I'd rather go in this direction. And that could be for any number of reasons, right? They might smell something super interesting a little bit up the way. Maybe they saw something, maybe they're bored with the direction that you took them. And so some ways I feel like it's a power struggle with Winnie is who's making decisions on the walk. And that could be because she has different desires and motivations for getting out than I do. In other domains, maybe in the house, I don't know if I've had much experience with what we would call a power struggle. So I don't think of myself as a pack leader. I don't think of myself as being her like dominant social counterpart. I feel like it's a little bit more equitable. Yeah, I make most decisions for her, but I don't try and like impose myself as the ruler of the pack.
Sandy has one, a bit of psychoanalysis here, I guess. So Sandy says, my dog goes into stalking mode when she sees a dog she doesn't know. If the other owner doesn't greet my pup, mine growls and spins. Could she be scared or protective of me, or is this stalking action something else?
The stalking is really interesting. So if it's only a dog she doesn't know, and because stalking is what we would consider to be a pretty strong predatory behavior, right? So it could be that she's trying to sneak up on them. It could be that she's projecting some image of a predator and she's trying to appear a little bit more threatening because she doesn't know what the social relationship is going to be like. Those would be my guesses. But as for why demanding acknowledgement from people, like that absolutely makes sense for me, but I haven't seen a dog growl and spin around before. Usually what happens, Winnie's a corgi and very low to the ground. She'll come up and slap my legs if I'm not paying attention. She'll do that to other people as well.
Some Bob shuffling around behind Tripper.
Oh, Brian, do you have another question? Sorry.
Oh, no, sorry, I don't.
All right, well, I see we are past 7:30, so unless there's one last burning question, I think we could probably wrap it up.